rolling and staying on schedule. We're staying on schedule remarkably well. Next up, Amanda Knief, known of her...
Aww.
I'm done. Do I need to introduce her? Maybe a third of the audience was not applauding, so I'll go ahead with the introduction. Amanda currently works for American Atheists, where she's tasked with keeping Dave Silverman's butt out of the fire. Occasionally she succeeds, which I find extremely impressive, knowing Dave. Before that, she worked as the government relations manager with the Secular Coalition. Right before the Reason Rally, I don't know how many of you were involved in the lobby day, but Amanda organized 200-something atheists swarming Capitol Hill, lobbying their congressmen and senators. You know how hard we are to organize, and the fact that Amanda pulled that off is amazing. And she also, this is the fun thing that she particularly is proud of, I love talking about, at a town hall meeting in Maryland, told President Obama, live to his face, on television in front of 1,500 people, that she was an atheist, and then pressured him and called him out on not living up to some of his campaign promises about faith-based hiring in the faith-based initiatives. She's an activist, a lobbyist, and has been pushing for separation of church and state for years now. Let's welcome Amanda. She talks about atheists at work.
Can you hear me? Am I on? Hello? Okay, because I can yell. I've been a counselor at Camp Quest. I don't think some of them went back. So, good afternoon. How many of you are in a lunch coma? I wouldn't expect you to actually raise your hand if you were. All right. Jen McCrite very kindly let me borrow this, and I'm not sure how. There we go. Okay, so who the hell am I, and why should you believe I know what I'm talking about? Well, Jesse kind of told you, so I'm going to run through this really quick. I'm an attorney. I drafted legislation for 4 years at the Iowa legislature. Oh, I have to start my timer, or Jesse's going to actually drag me off the stage. Okay, here we go. I was lobbyist at the Secular Coalition. I've been an activist for over 7 years. I now work at the American Atheist, and just because I said so. Okay, so basically people kept coming up and saying, what actually are you going to talk about? And I'm going to talk about atheism in the workplace. How many of you have a job? How many of you want a job? Really, you want a job? How many expect to have a job sometime in your life? Pretty much everybody, unless your last name's Trump? Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is some things that happen with employment discrimination. And it's twofold. One, things that have been used against atheists, and when I say atheists today, I'm going to talk about all-encompassing our community. That means anyone who calls themselves an agnostic, a humanist, a skeptic. But I just need to use one term, because if I said all those things, I'd use half my time describing all of us, right? Okay. So I'm going to talk about what the law is, what your rights are, some of the things that you're going to face, and what you can do when you face some of those zealots at work, and what can you do and what your employer must do. And I want you to keep in mind that laughter is always the best medicine. I am a big fan of Reader's Digest, yes. But the big thing is that if you can laugh about something with anyone, you can usually get past your differences. At least that's my philosophy. So, atheism versus religion. Is atheism a religion? Yes, it is. And you're like, are you fucking kidding me? No, I'm not. Legally, it is recognized as having the same protections under the Constitution as any religion. And this is very important in the law. So when somebody says, well, atheism is just another religion, of course, what do you say? No, it's not a religion. But under constitutional protection, it receives the same protection as religion. Does that make sense? Well, you're smarter than I was. I had to go to law school to learn that. Okay, so here's my example for those of you who may be slightly confused about that. You have the right to free speech, correct? You also have the right not to speak, as I've demonstrated here by a protest that some legislators in Virginia did when they were advocating against some of the contraceptive laws that were being passed. They put these bandanas around their mouths to show that they were protesting it, and rather than being loud, they chose to be silent. They had that right. It's freedom of speech. It's the same kind of thing. You have the freedom of religion, you also have the freedom from religion, and it's constitutionally protected. And I could do a whole nother session on how we got to that point and why we're in trouble on it sometimes, but we don't have that much time, and I'm already down to like 18 minutes. So we'll keep going. And I pushed the wrong button again. Okay, so we fought for this. Everybody fought for this. We fought really hard for this. And we got the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and this prohibits employers from doing discrimination on several different things, and that includes Black Americans or any kind of discrimination on color. It includes women. It includes LGBT rights, and that's expanding now, and it includes religion. So, individuals cannot be discriminated against their religion, including atheism, non-religion, and this includes being hired, being fired, and any other terms and conditions of employment, like getting a raise or being promoted. Everybody with me? I know I'm going fast, I apologize. Okay, so your rights as an atheist. You do have them, I promise. They're just not coming up. Uh-oh. Help. I'm going to stop hitting it because I don't want to break. Oh, there we go. Okay. Employers may not treat, I have it memorized, but I know not everyone's a verbal learner. So employers may not treat you any less or differently than someone who isn't. So if your Christian coworker gets a promotion that you were equally right for and they have no other things and you got them because he or she got it because she was a Christian, you would have a case. Of course, what's the problem with that? You have to prove it. You cannot be required to participate or refrain from participating in religious activity as a condition of employment. So unless you go to work for the Catholic Church and you're a priest, you do not have to participate in a prayer group. Here's where it starts to get a little tricky. Employers must reasonably accommodate employees' sincerely held religious and non-religious practices unless doing so would impose an undue hardship on the employer. This is where lawyers speak starts to come in, but I need to know, are there any Pastafarians in the audience? How many of you celebrate Talk Like a Pirate Day? You're screwed. Okay, employers must take steps to prevent religious and non-religious harassment of employees. This one is particularly important, and I'm going to go into depth on these two, because how many of you have felt harassed by someone who's religious in your workplace? How many of you think that you've ever harassed someone because you're non-religious in the workplace? Okay, you are in trouble. And employers may not retaliate against you for asserting your rights under Title VII. Now, I have a handout for you guys. I'm not going to be able to take questions because we're going to run out of time. So what I'm going to do is we have volunteers who are going to give you this handout when you leave. And on it is usually the discussion that I have when I give this presentation when I'm not forced to do it in 20 minutes or less. I love you too. So what I want you to do is please take this, and after we're done with this, you should be able to have it. Talk about it with yourselves. If these are real life examples, nothing is made up. These are all things that people either told me when I solicited problems that people have had at work, or people have come up and told me on their own. I've changed all the names. And then come talk to me about it. I will be either at the American Atheist table or I'll be wandering around with Sagan, my dog, and you can come up and talk to me and maybe pet Sagan. Okay, so even though we fought for the law, it's actually the fact the employers who won. Because they are required to reasonably accommodate, unless doing so would create undue hardship, they have this thing called undue hardship. What's an undue hardship, right? Okay, well, the Supreme Court has ruled on this, and it means anything that's more than a minimal cost. And the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which puts this law into practice, has said ordinary administrative costs. So here's an example for you. Quite a few years ago, a man who worked for an airline union wanted to move from one company to another, from one shift to another in a different unit. So he moved from this one group to another, and he wanted to celebrate the Sabbath, which starts Friday night and goes through Saturday. Well, a lot of people want Friday night off, right? So unfortunately, because he transferred from one group to another, he became the low person on the privileges poll, and he didn't get Friday nights off anymore. So he made a claim to the employer, which was TWA, Trans World Airlines, and said that, you know, it's religious discrimination. I need religious accommodation to celebrate the Sabbath. And Trans World Airlines said no. And he sued, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that asking Trans World Airlines, TWA, to renegotiate the union contract was an undue hardship, just to get this guy to be able to have Friday nights off. And said that he probably sued the wrong people. He should have sued his union. So just because you celebrate something, just because you have religious preferences, this is why you are probably not likely always going to get your way. So we're the Pastafarians. You're not going to get talk like a parrot day off. Okay, so we can't ban Bibles because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Religion is actually okay at work. Yes, I did say that. Because it doesn't necessarily always create undue hardship. How many people have seen someone wear a yarmulke at work? How many have seen people wear a cross? How many of you worn a obnoxious atheist t-shirt to work? We're lucky bastards, aren't we? Yeah. None of that creates an undue hardship at most places. Now, here's an example where that could be a problem. If you work at a factory, or if you work in a food industry, where you're working with machinery, where anything that's dangling or is like earrings or things like that, anything besides a stud or a necklace, could become entangled in the machinery. A lot of you would have to wear your hair back if it was long, male or female. So it would not be religious discrimination if they put a ban on that. But if your Christian coworker shows up wearing a cross and says, oh, no, I have to wear it, and they still say no because it's a safety violation, the employer's in the right, okay? If you show up wearing your American Atheist necklace or your American Humanist necklace or whatever, you're not going to be able to wear it either. Surly doesn't get a pass either. So, what is a reasonable accommodation? When there's no safety hazard, when it's not offending anybody. If there's a dress code and you're supposed to wear a button-up shirt and instead you show up wearing, atheist idiot or friendly village atheist, that's not going to cut it because they have a dress code. You don't get to have an exception just because you're an awesome atheist. Okay, there's always an exception. There's a case called Hosanna Tabor. Real quick, I'll check my time. Okay, we're doing good. For years in the federal courts, there was something called the ministerial exception. This idea that if you were a religious employer, you could fire, hire, and suspend the rights of any employee who was a minister or considered a religious leader as long as they were a religious leader. And it hadn't been tested by the Supreme Court. Well, we got to Hosanna Tabor. And what this was a teacher who was hired by a Lutheran school. And it was a church and school combined. And the congregation voted. And it's supposed to be a calling to be a teacher at this school. And in addition to teaching, they also did some Bible study, okay, for the students. And I believe she was an elementary school teacher. She became ill and took time off and filed it under the American with Disabilities Act. And she let the school know everything. The congregation went ahead and hired someone else in her place. So when she tried to get her job back, they said no. Apparently the calling only lasts so long. And so she sued. And it went all the way up. Now, this school no longer exists. I'm not sure about the church, but the school is no longer in existence. And what the court said was that if you have religious training or you provide religious training, then you're a minister, and yes, all those federal laws, all those state laws that have been put into place over the last several decades to protect workers do not apply to you. So this has given almost carte blanche to any religious organization, any church that hires someone to then deny them workers' rights, and they're suspended. So it sucks. Don't go work for a religious organization. It really, it could be the janitor. If that janitor has religious training or they teach a Sunday school class, it is possible that their rights could be suspended. The Supreme Court did not define how this counts, what the scope of this is. They really left it open-ended, and I think they really left it open for abuse. So I expect more legislation on this. I expect more suits to be filed. I just can't imagine as clergy just rolling over and taking this. That was really bad to say. It was unintentional. I have a lot of bad jokes, but that was unintentional. Okay, remember how I said that religion can be in the workplace? I meant it. And I do this a lot before I worked for American Atheists. I still do it today a lot. Just back up, dude. Just go away. I can't take any more. The employer is required to maintain a work environment free of harassment, intimidation, and repeated insult. How many of you have heard about what's going on in our community with harassment policies and things like that? Okay, well, it is a very serious issue in the workplace, and it doesn't have to be anything sexual in nature. If you have someone who's coming up to you and repeatedly bothering you for any reason, whether it's they just want you to come to their Bible study on Wednesday and they ask you every Tuesday and they do it repeatedly, it becomes a problem. You start to avoid them. You no longer want to talk to them. You don't want to work with them. That's a problem that affects your work, and it becomes harassment. So you can file a complaint. So this can be religious demands, and it can also create this hostile work environment when it becomes so pervasive it affects your employment. The employer has to take reasonable steps. It can be that you file a complaint with HR or you tell your supervisor and they tell the employee, stop it. You can no longer ask this person anything about their religious ideology or non-religious ideology. Don't invite them to your church. Don't mention Easter. No more Christmas, anything. And if the person doesn't and they continue, they have to take stronger steps. And it should not be against you, the person who is the victim. It should be against the person who perpetrated it. Okay. And you shouldn't have to have a mental breakdown in order to do it. However, proselytizing is okay. It's perfectly fine if you walk into a workplace and say very quietly to a bunch of people, by the way, I'm an atheist. Here's a flyer for my next thing. As long as there are no rules prohibiting it for everybody. So if somebody in your work has come in and started passing out stuff saying, oh, by the way, my church is having this get-together, I'd like to invite all of you, and puts the flyers in a general area, and your work allows that, atheists can do it too. Corporate chaplains are okay. However, you cannot be required to speak or participate with a chaplain or services related to a chaplain. Has anybody worked where a chaplain has been in their job? Okay. Here's my solution. If you feel comfortable with this, you should make a request to HR for a non-religious equivalent. Because if they're willing to spend the money for a chaplain, they should have to spend the money for the equivalent that's non-religious. Because, thank you. Amen. Okay, I'll take it. A women would have been better. But seriously, you can put the request into HR, and you can do it anonymously. You can write a note and slip it under the door. Seriously, that way it won't be traced to your email. You can also put confidential request and send them an email. But if you're faced with this, where they're providing some sort of religious context for mental health or for employee satisfaction, ask for a non-religious alternative. And that goes for if they offer smoking incentives to quit, or Alcoholics Anonymous, or any kind of programs. A lot of big corporations do this kind of healthy living type of stuff, and a lot of it has religious overtones. Make sure that if you're, whether or not you're going to participate, demand that they be a non-religious equivalent. Make them spend the money. Prayer groups are okay. And every company is going to be different. Sometimes they will provide the room for it. They will allow you to post it on a community board. How many of you have a place at work where you're allowed to put, I'm having a garage sale this weekend, or I have this bike I want to sell, or there's going to be a get-together on the 4th of July. If you have a community board like that, then usually it's okay. I would always check with HR first, especially if you haven't seen a religious flyer up there, but it's perfectly okay to do it as long as you're not violating anything that your group is doing. And if there is a prayer group at your work, it's perfectly legal and okay, and it should be allowed for you to have an atheist group. So if the religious group is meeting on Wednesdays in the lunchroom, make sure the atheist group is meeting Thursdays in the lunchroom. And we'll see how long both of you are allowed to meet. Okay. And it could always be worse. Okay, but what does this all mean? Y'all still with me? Doing all right? Okay. Could get Matt Dillon up here, but, Atheists are protected by the Constitution, the First Amendment, and the 1964 Civil Rights Act against religious discrimination. Everything I've talked about is federal. How many of you live in a state? How many of you live in Washington, D.C.? Yeah, okay. So, even Washington, D.C. and the states, they all have their own employment discrimination laws. The federal is the baseline. These are the minimum protections that you have across the board. Every state is going to have equal or more protective laws, okay? So nothing I say here means that this is absolute. For example, a lot of these laws apply to large corporations, large employers. None of them, for example, apply, well, not all of them. A lot of them would not apply to American Atheists because we're very small, we don't have enough employees. So then we would look at state law and see what New Jersey does. And New Jersey has laws that apply to much smaller states. So you want to look and see, or excuse me, smaller employers. You want to look and see what your state does. And it's very easy to do that. You can go to almost any state website and they have a way to look at their laws. And you can do a search and you can look it up. How many of you have ever done that? I do a whole other speaking thing about how to do that. So invite me to your place and I'll teach you how to do it. Okay, your employer has no right to impose religious views upon you, with exceptions if you work for a religious employer. Seriously, I didn't touch the wrong button. It did it on its own. It's haunted. Okay, you have no right to harass others at work because of their religious beliefs. I'm going to tell you a quick story about this. How many of you get really passionate when you talk about your atheism or about your work or about, volunteering for one of the organizations? Yeah, we all do. Well, most of us do. There's a few deadpanners out there. A friend of mine, and he told me I could share this story, had come out to just about everybody. And a friend of his who was also on Facebook worked with him. And so literally they were standing by a water cooler and they were having a just plain discussion about atheism. The coworker was asking my friend about atheism. Just matter-of-factly. There was no heat. There was no arguing. It was just a back and forth. A third person heard it from her cubicle. Okay? And a few minutes into the discussion, my friend's cell phone rings, which he had clipped to his belt. And he picks it up because it's his boss. And he answers it, and his boss says, "Are you talking about atheism right now?" And my friend says, "Yeah." He goes, "You need to stop immediately and not mention it at work again." What had happened, and what's interesting, is my friend's boss, works in a different state. This third person, who is a fervent Christian, overheard the discussion and was so appalled that people would be talking about atheism at work and that she had to listen to it, that she called Human Resources and complained. Human Resources then called my friend's boss to inform him of the complaint, and then he immediately called my friend. So keep in mind that even something as innocuous as a back and forth Q&A can get us into trouble. How many of you have overheard people talking about their religion? Have any of you filed a complaint? Okay, one or two of you, and that's fair. But most of us let it go because it's the majority, right? We don't think of it as, unless somebody's really pushing it on you, unless somebody's coming at you, a casual discussion. I don't flip out when somebody talks about Easter. But you have to be careful. And there are going to be some of you in the audience who've had great discussions with your coworkers and never had a problem. And that will continue to be true. But be aware that it is a problem and that you can be seen as the harasser because we're all coming out of the closet. And with this openness and with this coming out come new problems and new issues and new confrontations with people who are not ready yet to see us that way. Kind of understand? It's just one of the realities. So here's my solution for you. If somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I see that you're an atheist and I have questions. Can I talk to you about it?" Say, "Sure. How about we meet after work and I'll buy you a drink?" And that way you can have that discussion. It takes place outside of work and you don't cross any of those lines. It protects you, it protects your coworker, and it protects your paycheck. Okay, and again, the Pastafarians, you're screwed on Talk Like a Pirate Day. I am very sorry. Okay, so we have 10 seconds. So, please. Thank you very much. Please pick up the sheet on your way out, and I told you. And I will be happy to answer questions and talk to all of you the rest of the weekend. I hope you enjoyed the great conference we're having.